Welcome to the Public Interest. I am Malika Ramsey. This week we're forced actually to revisit an issue that has affected many of our Guyanese. We think it's not affecting us, but indeed it is affecting us, and that has to do with the Venezuelan threat to Guyana territory. Of course, with me, somebody who's experienced in that area to discuss that, as always, leader of the People's National Congress Reform and leader of the opposition, Mr. David Granger. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you very much, Malika.
All right. How serious really is it for Guyanese? How much should we know about what is really going on regarding the Venezuela-Guyana issue?
Well, the problem is that most Guyanese do not live in Esequibo. Most Guyanese are too young to be aware of the threats to the territorial integrity of Guyana. And most Guyanese feel they're unaffected by what Venezuela has been saying or doing, because in this day and age, Venezuela is unlikely to launch a military attack in Guyana. We're not in danger of having a whole-scale attack. We know that Venezuela, even before Guyana became independent in 1966, tried to overturn the 1899 award, in which, at that award, Venezuela was given a huge chunk of land. They weren't robbed of anything. They were given a huge chunk of land in the Orinoco Delta. There was a president of Venezuela called President Leone, and he decreed that all of the water, all the territorial waters off of the coast of the Esequibo, I mean, this is where the boat goes to adventure, Suriname, all of those waters were Venezuelan waters. And he gave instructions to his foreign minister and his minister of defense to exercise Venezuelan sovereignty. So Guyanese should be concerned, because most Guyanese living today are not aware, but there have been real threats. So what we saw happening on the 10th of October is really a continuation. But more than that, it's a threat that our future development of the Esequibo will be impaired by the use of armed force by Venezuela. That's how serious it is, as far as I'm concerned. We had a situation under the regime of President Carlos Andres Perez of Venezuela and Mr. Forbes Burnham of Guyana, in which he actually offered to finance the hydropower project in the Cuyuni Mazruni, and he offered to reduce the actual claim of Guyanese territory if Burnham would give him the Esequibo coast. You see, Venezuela is always driven by this desire to have an outlet to the Atlantic, what they call Salida al Atlántico. Various presidents have gone to Venezuela. President Jagan went to Venezuela. President Jagdeo went to Venezuela. I'm sure that in due course President Ramata will go to Venezuela, to Caracas, be given a medal, but we must be careful and ensure that these visits, these gifts, do not affect the principle of maintaining the territorial integrity of Guyana. I think the Guyana Defense Force and its Coast Guard are there as deterrents against Venezuelan intrusion. So, quite frankly, I don't think it is possible, militarily possible, to prevent an intrusion as occurred on the 10th of October. Guyana needs to cooperate more closely with the other Caribbean states, for example, Grenada, Barbados, and all of the other Anglophone Caribbean states in CARICOM, because this is not a bilateral matter.
Are we to give up what they want? What would we really be losing?
You'll be losing your wealth. You'll be losing your ability to exploit minerals and fish resources for the benefit of your children and for your country. You'll be losing it forever. It will be gaining power because it will now have an access to the Atlantic, which is pursued for the last 70 years. And it will have more access to wealth, more fishing grounds, more minerals, whatever is discovered there. Venezuela has been very aggressive.
Were we to move from cooperation to confrontation with Venezuela, what would you possibly recommend to the Army, the Guyana Defense Force? How would you probably advise them on dealing with such a situation?
Well, the defense force has to be strong, it has to be alert, it has to ensure that there are no breaches. For example, the breaches that occurred at Etringbang on the 31st of August, and I think it occurred later on, there was a second incident. What we see happening in our maritime zone is perhaps the most serious event we've had, even since independence, in terms of the threat. In the past, we've had provocation, we've had overflights by Venezuelan military aircraft, we've had threatening songs at the diplomatic and other level, but this time they've sent a ship of war, a corvette, into our waters, and they've forced an unarmed civilian survey ship to go into Venezuelan waters. This is very, very serious act of provocation. The territorial conflict is like well over 150 years old.
Okay.
And it was resolved, it was settled in 1999. We went to tribunal in The Hague, and there was arbitration. So as far as Guyana is concerned, there is no controversy. The matter is settled, and our borders have been defined, and our borders remain unchanged. And really from that time, more or less for the last 50 years, we've had a series of provocative actions. And at the time of 1969, the Rupunun rebellion, there was evidence of Venezuelan involvement. And the Venezuelans had claimed the whole Esequibo coast, the whole Esequibo in fact, and the waters off the Esequibo coast. And this is the first time that they have actually sent a warship into our waters to force or to evict an unarmed civilian vessel. So this is a serious one. This is not just a few students going to Etringbang. This is serious. When you send a warship, you only do that to display force. Okay. President Maduro visited here on the 31st of July, but significantly, on the same day of President Maduro's visit, 31st of August, 31st of August, the same day of that visit, a group of Venezuelans tried to land at Etringbang. Whether or not they were posing as students, I cannot say this time. In fact, I've asked a question in the National Assembly when we returned to the National Assembly. And those students actually declared it was an act of sovereignty. So they came there with at least two objectives. One is to embarrass President Maduro, to maybe shame him while he was paying a visit to Georgetown, even though Etringbang is remote. Many people in Guyana don't know where Etringbang is. And secondly, they said, and the students said in their declaration, that it was an act of sovereignty. That is, they were demonstrating Venezuelans' claim to the Esequibo.
This call means that you're not satisfied with the way government has so far dealt with the Venezuelan threat to our nation. If my statement is accurate, why are you not satisfied with the way it has been dealt with?
Frankly, as soon as the incident occurred on Thursday, the 10th of October, let me make it clear that the Guyanese nation is united on the question of territorial integrity. Now, the government went into negotiations with the Venezuelans. I did speak with the president, and I was made aware by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the basic outline of the threat that, or the incident that occurred on Thursday the 10th of October. But I had to recall, for the president's benefit, the fact that I was a member of the Border National Security Committee 12 years ago, in 2001. Well, every country has to defend its territorial integrity. No territory, no country. And if Guyana were to allow its neighbors to take whatever they wanted from our territory, we'll have nothing left. Because the last 47 years since independence, apart from the temporary loss, I call it temporary loss of a part of the island of Coco in the Cuyuni River, we have been successful in defending our country's integrity. What has happened is that, as Venezuela claimed the entire Esequibo, as I said, in 1899, there was a tribunal and Venezuela was awarded some lands in the Orinoco area, a huge amount of land, but in the 1940s, about 1944, one of the junior counsel at the tribunal, the Venezuelan junior counsel, wrote a memorandum, which it sounds comical now, said must only be published after his death. And after he died, this thing was published, and he accused the members of the tribunal of conspiring against Venezuela. Venezuela always complained, they were always, maybe you can say, hostile. I believe the government might have been mesmerized by the trade deals it has achieved with the Venezuelans, selling rice, buying petrol through the Petro-Caribe deal. And naturally, we are a small state. Venezuela is much richer, much bigger, much more powerful. It has a big navy. And nobody wants to tangle with the Navy, but as I said, since independence, we have been able to stand up for our rights, and we've been able to rely on international organizations. For example, the United Nations Charter specifically prohibits the use of force to settle international disputes. Can you imagine what would happen around the world if countries felt free to use force?
Mr. Granger, do you believe that this could, despite your concerns, that this could be the end of this matter with Venezuela, or do you believe that it's the beginning of something potentially dangerous for our nation?
It's not the end of anything, it's not the beginning of anything, it's a continuation of a pattern of harassment that we've seen over the last 50 years from Venezuela.
Thank you very much, sir. Leader of the People's National Congress Reform and Leader of the Opposition, Mr. David Granger. This has been another edition of The Public Interest. I am Malaika Ramsey. Thanks for watching.